The crimson sun hung low over the Texas plains, casting long shadows across the blood-soaked earth where Jonathan Mitchell had drawn his last breath. Sarah Mitchell knelt beside her husband's lifeless body, her calloused hands trembling as they pressed against the growing swell of her belly. 6 months pregnant and now utterly alone, she stared at the arrow shaft protruding from Jonathan's chest, its eagle feathers dancing mockingly in the evening breeze. "God help me," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the wind that swept across their modest ranch. The words felt hollow in the vast emptiness surrounding her. 23 years old, Sarah had never imagined she would face such a moment. The Apache war party had struck without warning, while Jonathan was mending the fence line near Eagle Creek. She had heard the gunshots from their cabin, followed by war cries that chilled her to the bone. By the time she reached him, clutching the Winchester rifle with white knuckles, the raiders had vanished like smoke into the mesquite and sagebrush. The landscape stretched endlessly in every direction, rolling hills dotted with scrub oak and prickly pear cactus. The nearest neighbor 15 miles south, their ranch, carved from 200 acres of stubborn Texas soil, represented 3 years of backbreaking labor and unwavering dreams. Every fence post, every cleared acre, every stone in their cabin's foundation had been placed by Jonathan's hands, often with Sarah working beside him despite her condition. Sarah's mind raced as darkness began to creep across the sky. The baby kicked forcefully, as if sensing her distress. She placed both hands on her stomach, feeling the life growing within her, Jonathan's child, conceived in love and hope for their future together. The thought of this innocent being depending entirely on her survival sent a surge of fierce determination through her grief-stricken heart. "I won't let them have what we built," she said aloud, her voice gaining strength. "I won't let them drive us from our home." The promise echoed across the empty plains, carried by the wind toward the distant mountains where Apache smoke signals still danced against the darkening sky. She knew the dangers that lay ahead. Apache raiding parties had been increasing their attacks throughout the territory, driven from their traditional lands by the relentless push of settlers and soldiers. Local ranchers had been abandoning their claims, fleeing east to safer territories. The army garrison at Fort Griffin was undermanned and spread too thin to provide adequate protection for isolated homesteads like theirs. Standing slowly, Sarah felt the weight of her pregnancy and the overwhelming responsibility that now rested solely on her shoulders. She couldn't lift Jonathan's body alone, but she couldn't leave him exposed to the elements and scavengers either. Using every ounce of strength she possessed, she managed to drag him toward the barn, stopping frequently to rest and catch her breath. The physical exertion caused sharp pains in her lower back, but she pressed on, driven by love and respect for the man who had given her everything. As night fell completely, Sarah barricaded herself inside their cabin, pushing the heavy oak table against the door and checking the ammunition for both the Winchester and Jonathan's Colt revolver. She had grown up on a farm in Missouri, learning to shoot and hunt alongside her brothers before the war scattered her family to the winds. Those skills would now mean the difference between life and death for herself and her unborn child. The baby's movements seemed more active in the darkness, perhaps responding to her elevated heartbeat and the adrenaline coursing through her system. Sarah spoke softly to the child she carried, her voice a mixture of tenderness and steel resolve. "Your daddy was the bravest man I ever knew, little one. He built this place with his bare hands, and he'd want us to fight for it. We're going to make him proud." Outside, coyotes began their nightly chorus, their haunting calls mixing with the rustle of prairie grass in the wind. Every sound made Sarah's pulse quicken. Every shadow visible through the cabin's single window could conceal a threat. But alongside the fear, something else was growing within her, a maternal instinct so powerful it transformed her grief into an unshakable determination to survive and protect what mattered most. The flickering candlelight cast dancing shadows on the cabin walls, illuminating the simple furnishings that represented their modest but happy life together. Jonathan's clothes still hung on pegs near the door. His coffee cup sat unwashed beside the wash basin. His books lay open on the table where he had been reading the night before. These tangible reminders of their shared dreams and daily routines strengthened her resolve rather than weakening it. Sarah knew that tomorrow would bring new challenges and impossible decisions. Should she attempt the dangerous journey to Fort Griffin for help? Could she defend the ranch alone if another attack came? How would she manage the daily demands of frontier life while carrying a child? The questions multiplied in her mind, but one truth remained constant. She would not abandon the home they had built together, no matter what dangers awaited in the Texas wilderness. The first pale light of dawn crept through the cabin's single window, finding Sarah Mitchell still awake, still gripping the Winchester rifle across her lap. She had spent the entire night listening to every creak of the wooden walls, every whisper of wind through the eaves, waiting for sounds that might signal another attack. Her back ached from sitting upright in the hard chair, and the baby had been restless, kicking frequently as if responding to her elevated state of alertness. As golden sunlight spread across the Texas plains, Sarah finally allowed herself to move the barricade from the door. Her first task was heartbreaking, but necessary. She had to bury Jonathan properly. The thought of leaving him in the barn any longer was unbearable, but digging a grave in her condition would test every limit of her physical endurance. She stepped outside cautiously, scanning the horizon for any signs of movement. The morning air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of sage and wildflowers that seemed to mock the tragedy of the previous day. Their small herd of cattle grazed peacefully in the distance, apparently undisturbed by the violence that had shattered Sarah's world. The sight of them brought both relief and a stark reminder of the responsibilities that now fell entirely on her shoulders. Behind the cabin, Jonathan had already chosen a spot overlooking Eagle Creek where he wanted to be buried someday, never imagining that day would come so soon. Sarah began the agonizing work of digging, using Jonathan's spade and stopping frequently to rest her aching back and catch her breath. The Texas soil was hard and stubborn, baked by the relentless sun and mixed with limestone that turned each shovelful into a battle. Sweat poured down her face despite the cool morning air, and the baby's weight made every movement awkward and strenuous. 3 hours into her labor, Sarah heard the distant sound of approaching horses. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she grabbed the rifle and took cover behind a large mesquite tree. Through the branches she watched as 4 riders approached from the east, their horses kicking up small clouds of dust. As they drew closer, she recognized the blue uniforms of cavalry soldiers from Fort Griffin. "Hello, the house," called out the lead rider, a weathered sergeant with graying whiskers. "Mrs. Mitchell, we heard gunshots yesterday and came to check on you folks." Sarah emerged from her hiding spot, keeping the rifle ready but not directly threatening. "Sergeant," she called back, her voice hoarse from exhaustion and grief, "I'm afraid you're too late to help my husband, but I appreciate you coming." The soldiers dismounted and approached respectfully, removing their hats when they saw Jonathan's body wrapped in a blanket near the half-dug grave. Sergeant Murphy, a 20-year veteran of frontier campaigns, had seen enough tragedy to recognize the signs immediately. His weathered face softened with genuine sympathy as he took in Sarah's condition and the obvious evidence of her solitary struggle. "Ma'am, I'm truly sorry for your loss," Murphy said quietly. "Apache raiding party hit the Henderson place 2 days ago, and we've been tracking them ever since. Found some sign they passed through this area yesterday." He gestured toward the partially completed grave. "Let us finish that for you. No woman in your condition should be doing such work alone." While the soldiers completed the burial, Sarah found herself facing a choice she had dreaded. Sergeant Murphy strongly urged her to abandon the ranch and return east to safety, perhaps to Fort Griffin, where army wives could help her through the birth of her child. The Apache raids were intensifying, he explained, and the military couldn't guarantee protection for isolated homesteads. "This land isn't worth your life, Mrs. Mitchell," Murphy said earnestly as they stood beside Jonathan's fresh grave. "Or the life of that baby you're carrying. Your husband wouldn't want you to stay here and risk everything for a piece of ground." Sarah's jaw tightened with determination that surprised even her. "Sergeant, this isn't just a piece of ground. It's 3 years of our lives, our dreams, our future. Jonathan died protecting it, and I won't dishonor his sacrifice by running away." She placed her hand on her swollen belly. "This child deserves to inherit something more than the memory of parents who gave up when times got hard." The sergeant studied her face, recognizing the stubborn resolve that had driven countless pioneers to claim impossible dreams from an unforgiving wilderness. He had seen that look before in the eyes of men and women who refused to be broken by hardship and danger. "Ma'am, I can't force you to leave, but I can tell you that more attacks are coming. The Apache are desperate, pushed hard by the army and running out of places to hide. Desperate men do desperate things." As the soldiers prepared to leave, Murphy provided Sarah with crucial information about the local situation. A small band of Apache warriors, led by a war chief named Red Hawk, had been conducting hit-and-run attacks throughout the territory. They struck quickly and vanished into the rugged hill country to the west, making pursuit nearly impossible. Several ranchers had already been killed, and others had abandoned their claims rather than risk their families' lives. "If you're determined to stay," Murphy said reluctantly, "then you need to be smart about it. Keep that rifle close, vary your routines, and watch for smoke signals on the horizon. Apache communicate across great distances that way. And Mrs. Mitchell," he paused, his expression grave, "if they come again, don't try to be a hero. Sometimes survival means knowing when to hide instead of fight." After the soldiers departed, Sarah stood alone beside her husband's grave, the reality of her situation settling over her like a heavy blanket. She was pregnant, isolated, and facing an enemy that had already proven they would show no mercy. Yet as she looked out over the land that she and Jonathan had claimed together, her resolve only strengthened. The cattle needed water, the chickens required feeding, and the vegetable garden that would sustain her through the coming months needed tending. Each task represented a small victory against the forces trying to drive her from her home. As she worked throughout the day, Sarah developed a routine that would become her lifeline in the weeks ahead. Constant vigilance combined with stubborn persistence in maintaining the daily requirements of frontier life. That evening, as she secured the cabin for another night, Sarah felt the baby move strongly, as if responding to her thoughts. She spoke softly to the child, her voice carrying both tenderness and steel determination. "Your daddy believed in this place, little one. He believed it was worth fighting for, worth dying for. Now it's up to us to prove he was right." 2 weeks had passed since Jonathan's burial, and Sarah Mitchell had fallen into a rhythm of survival that would have seemed impossible just days before. Each morning brought the same careful routine: scan the horizon for threats, tend to the livestock, check the water supply at Eagle Creek, and maintain the modest vegetable garden that would sustain her through the approaching winter. Her pregnancy had progressed to 7 months, making every task more challenging, but her determination had only grown stronger. The isolation was perhaps the most difficult enemy she faced. Days passed without hearing another human voice, except her own quiet conversations with the unborn child. She found herself talking to the cattle, to Jonathan's grave, even to the wind that swept across the endless plains. The silence was both a blessing and a curse. It meant no immediate danger, but it also amplified every creak of the cabin walls and every unusual sound from the surrounding wilderness. On this particular morning, Sarah noticed something that made her blood run cold. Smoke signals rose from the hills to the west, thin columns of black smoke appearing and disappearing in a pattern she had learned to recognize from Sergeant Murphy's warnings. The Apache were communicating, and their messages were being sent from uncomfortably close to her ranch. She spent the day in heightened alert, keeping the Winchester close while performing her necessary chores. The cattle seemed nervous too, bunching together near the creek instead of spreading out to graze as they normally did. Even the horses in the small corral appeared skittish, their ears constantly swiveling toward sounds Sarah couldn't hear. As afternoon shadows began to lengthen, Sarah's worst fears materialized. 3 Apache warriors appeared at the crest of the hill overlooking her ranch, sitting motionless on their horses like carved statues against the sky. They were close enough that she could see the war paint on their faces and the weapons they carried, but far enough away that a rifle shot would be uncertain at best. Sarah's heart pounded as she retreated to the cabin, barricading the door and taking up position at the window with her rifle ready. The warriors remained on the hilltop for what felt like hours, clearly studying her defenses and assessing the situation. She could see them pointing and gesturing, apparently discussing their options. The baby kicked frantically, as if sensing her terror and the adrenaline coursing through her system. As darkness approached, the warriors vanished as silently as they had appeared, leaving Sarah to wonder if they had been real, or if the isolation and stress were affecting her mind. But the horses' continued nervousness and the cattle's refusal to venture far from the creek confirmed that the threat had been genuine. That night brought no rest. Sarah maintained her vigil at the window, watching for any sign of movement in the darkness. She had learned to distinguish between the normal sounds of the night: coyotes calling, owls hunting, cattle shifting in their sleep, and the subtle differences that might indicate human presence. Every shadow seemed to move. Every whisper of wind through the grass could conceal approaching footsteps. Near midnight, her worst nightmare became reality. A flickering orange glow appeared in the distance, growing brighter with each passing moment. The hay barn, nearly 200 yards from the cabin, was on fire. Sarah watched in horror as flames consumed months of stored feed that she would need to keep her livestock alive through the winter. The fire had been set deliberately, she was certain, a message from Red Hawk's warriors that they could strike whenever and wherever they chose. The blaze illuminated the surrounding area with an eerie light, and Sarah caught glimpses of figures moving in the darkness at the edge of the fire's glow. They were testing her, she realized, trying to force her into making a desperate mistake. If she left the cabin to fight the fire, she would be vulnerable to attack. If she stayed inside, she would lose precious resources that could mean the difference between survival and starvation. Sarah made the hardest decision of her life. She remained in the cabin, watching helplessly as the barn burned to the ground. Tears of rage and frustration streamed down her face, but she kept the rifle ready and refused to give the warriors the opportunity they were seeking. The baby seemed to respond to her emotional turmoil, moving constantly and making it impossible for her to find any comfortable position. As dawn broke over the smoldering ruins of the barn, Sarah found herself facing a new reality. The Apache had demonstrated that they could reach any part of her ranch whenever they chose. They were playing with her, like a cat toying with a mouse, gradually wearing down her defenses and her resolve. But instead of breaking her spirit, the attack had crystallized her determination into something harder than the Texas soil itself. She spent the morning examining the burned remains and found clear evidence of the attack: horse tracks, the remnants of torches, and other signs that confirmed her suspicions. But she also discovered something else that gave her hope. In their haste to escape before daylight, the raiders had left behind a broken arrow and torn piece of cloth that had caught on the barn's fence. These were clues that might help the cavalry track the war party, if she could somehow get word to Fort Griffin. The problem was distance and timing. Fort Griffin was 2 days' hard ride away, and making the journey in her condition would be extremely dangerous. But staying and waiting for another attack might be even more perilous. Sarah realized she was trapped between equally dangerous choices, with her unborn child's life hanging in the balance of every decision she made. That afternoon, as she tended to her frightened livestock and tried to assess how much feed remained in the other storage areas, Sarah felt the first strong contractions. They were still weeks apart and lasted only a few seconds, but they served as a stark reminder that time was running out in more ways than one. The baby would come whether she was ready or not, whether the ranch was safe or under siege. Standing amid the ashes of her burned barn, with the Texas sun beating down mercilessly and the taste of smoke still in the air, Sarah Mitchell made a vow that would define the rest of her life. She placed both hands on her swollen belly and spoke aloud, her voice carrying across the empty plains with the force of absolute conviction. "They think they can drive us away by destroying what we've built," she said to her unborn child. "But they don't understand what kind of people we are. Your father didn't give up when the land was hard to clear, when the cattle got sick, when drought threatened our water supply. He fought for every acre, every fence post, every dream we had together, and now it's my turn to fight. For you, for him, for the home we're going to defend, no matter what it costs." The baby responded with a strong kick, as if approving of her words. In that moment, surrounded by destruction but unbroken in spirit, Sarah felt a strength she hadn't known she possessed. The Apache had shown her they could burn her buildings, scatter her livestock, and terrorize her nights. But they had also shown her something else, that she was capable of surviving anything they could do to her. 3 days after the barn burning, Sarah Mitchell woke to the sound that had haunted her nightmares, war cries echoing across the Texas plains in the pre-dawn darkness. But this time was different. This time, she was ready. The contractions had been coming regularly since midnight, still hours apart, but growing stronger with each wave. 8 months pregnant and facing what could be her final battle, Sarah had spent the previous day preparing for this moment with methodical precision. Every window was barricaded except for carefully positioned firing ports. Ammunition was distributed throughout the cabin within easy reach. Water and medical supplies were arranged near the bed where she might soon give birth, alone and under siege. As the first Apache warrior appeared in the dooryard, Sarah took her position at the eastern window with Jonathan's Winchester. The early morning light revealed 5 painted warriors on horseback, led by a tall figure whose red and black war paint identified him as Red Hawk himself. They had come to finish what they started, expecting to find a broken woman ready to flee or die. Instead, Sarah's first shot took Red Hawk's horse from under him, sending the war chief tumbling to the ground and scattering the other riders. Her years of hunting with her brothers in Missouri had not been forgotten. Even 8 months pregnant, even terrified and alone, her aim remained true. "This is my land," she shouted through the gun smoke, working the rifle's lever with practiced efficiency. "My husband's blood is in this soil, and you'll have to spill mine to take it." The Apache responded with a coordinated attack, using their horses as shields while firing arrows and old trade muskets at the cabin. Sarah moved from window to window, keeping them guessing about her position while conserving ammunition for the clearest shots. A fierce contraction doubled her over, just as an arrow splintered the wood beside her head, but she gritted her teeth and continued firing. Red Hawk had recovered from his fall and now directed his warriors with tactical precision born from years of frontier warfare. They set fire to the chicken coop and attempted to drive the cattle toward the cabin, hoping to use the chaos and smoke as cover for a direct assault. But Sarah had anticipated this strategy, having spent weeks studying their methods and planning her defense. As smoke began to fill the cabin, another contraction hit, stronger this time, lasting nearly a minute. Sarah realized with growing alarm that the baby was coming whether she was ready or not. Between the physical demands of labor and the desperate battle for her life, she felt her strength beginning to waver. But the thought of her child being born into slavery or death drove her to fight harder than she had ever imagined possible. "Jonathan," she whispered during a brief lull in the fighting, placing one hand on her belly while keeping the rifle ready with the other. "Help me keep our promise. Help me protect what we built together." Red Hawk made his mistake when he tried to approach the cabin from the blind spot near the well. Sarah had positioned a mirror to watch that angle, and when his reflection appeared in the glass, she was ready. Her shot caught him in the shoulder, spinning him around and sending him stumbling back toward cover. The wound wasn't fatal, but it demonstrated that this white woman was a far more dangerous opponent than he had expected. The battle continued through the morning, a deadly game of patience and precision. Sarah's contractions were now coming every few minutes, forcing her to time her movements and shots between waves of pain. During one particularly intense contraction, she heard footsteps on the cabin roof and realized one of the warriors was trying to enter through the chimney. With no time to aim carefully, Sarah fired straight up through the roof boards, rewarded by a cry of pain and the sound of a body sliding down the exterior wall. But the effort cost her. She felt warm liquid running down her legs and knew her water had broken. The baby was coming now, battle or no battle. As if sensing her vulnerability, the Apache launched their final assault. 2 warriors charged the front door, while another tried to break through the eastern window. Sarah's world narrowed to pure survival instinct. Fire, reload, move, fire again. A musket ball grazed her arm, an arrow buried itself in the wooden table she used for cover, but she kept fighting even as labor pains threatened to overwhelm her. Then, through the gun smoke and chaos, she heard the most beautiful sound imaginable, the thunder of approaching horses and the sharp crack of cavalry carbines. Sergeant Murphy and a patrol from Fort Griffin had arrived, drawn by the smoke and gunfire visible from miles away. The Apache, caught between Sarah's determined defense and the soldiers' disciplined fire, began to retreat toward the hills. Red Hawk, wounded but still defiant, made one last attempt to reach the cabin. He emerged from behind the water trough with a tomahawk raised, limping but moving with deadly purpose. Sarah's rifle was empty, her revolver beyond reach, and a contraction had left her doubled over in pain. For a moment that seemed to last forever. She stared into the eyes of the man who had killed her husband and terrorized her for weeks. But Red Hawk had underestimated the depth of a mother's protective instinct. Sarah grabbed the heavy iron poker from beside the fireplace and swung it with all her remaining strength. The blow caught the war chief across the temple, dropping him unconscious to the cabin floor, just as another wave of labor pain announced that her child would wait no longer. Sergeant Murphy found her 20 minutes later, cradling a red-faced, squalling infant, while Red Hawk lay bound and unconscious nearby. The other Apache warriors had fled, their leader captured, and their confidence in easy victory shattered by one woman's impossible courage. "Mrs. Mitchell," Murphy said softly, removing his hat as he looked at the scene of destruction surrounding the cabin. "I've never seen anything like this. How did you—" "I kept my promise," Sarah replied, her voice weak but filled with quiet pride. She looked down at her son, Jonathan's son, who had entered the world in the midst of battle but was now safe in her arms. "I promised I'd protect what we built, no matter the cost. This is our home, Sergeant. This is where we belong." The aftermath brought changes that Sarah had never dared hope for. Red Hawk's capture broke the back of Apache resistance in the region, and his surviving warriors scattered to join other bands far from the Texas plains. More importantly, word of Sarah's stand spread throughout the territory, inspiring other settlers to return to their abandoned claims and bringing new families to the area. Within 6 months, Sarah Mitchell was no longer alone on the frontier. 3 new families had settled within 10 miles of her ranch, creating a small but growing community of people who understood the value of determination and mutual support. The general store in the growing town of Eagle Creek, named for the stream that ran through her property, carried a sign that read, "Founded in honor of Sarah Mitchell's stand." As autumn painted the Texas hills in brilliant colors, Sarah stood beside Jonathan's grave, holding their son, now 6 months old and healthy as a young colt. The ranch had been rebuilt and expanded, the cattle herd had grown, and the future that had seemed impossible during those dark weeks of siege was now bright with promise. "Your daddy would be so proud," she whispered to little Jonathan, who gurgled happily in the crisp fall air. "We kept his dream alive, just like we promised. This land is ours, son, bought with courage, paid for with love, and defended with everything we had to give." The wind carried her words across the plains toward the distant hills, where new settlers were building their own dreams on land, made safe by one woman's refusal to surrender what mattered most. Sarah Mitchell had proven that the strongest fortresses are not built of stone and steel, but of love, determination, and the unbreakable promise of a mother to protect what she holds dear.